As Ire was coming into her room, she saw a strange woman wearing a red garment standing inside. Before her very eyes, the ghostly woman disappeared. Ire could not see clearly anymore. Her head became heavy and chills ran down her spine. She was terrified by what she saw and fainted. Once upon a time, there was a man named Ola. Ola was married to Ire and they lived in a town called Wedded. He worked as a manager in a large telecommunications company, and after years of loyal service, he was transferred to another city far away from one they lived to head the company's new branch. Ola was excited about the opportunity, but little did he know this transfer would change his life in ways he could never have imagined. Ola and his wife Ire embarked on this journey and located to a neighboring city called Igbese town. When they arrived in Igbese town, they were stranded with nowhere to stay. Since they had just arrived, they decided to stay in a hotel until they could find an apartment. They stayed in the hotel for 3 weeks, but by the 4th week, they ran short of funds. The agent tasked with finding them a house kept postponing and asking for more money. The more money they gave him, the more excuses he made. Ola and Ire could not take it any longer and decided to search for a house by themselves. They searched for 2 weeks but couldn't find anything affordable. Finally, on the 3rd week, out of desperation, they found a house that seemed cheaper, spacious, and had a garden filled with overgrown trees and shrubs, and decided to rent it. On the day they went to inspect the house, Ire noticed something strange. The house had an airy and aged look. She asked her husband, "Did you notice anything strange about this house?" Her husband replied, "Everything seems normal to me. I don't notice anything strange at all." But Ire responded, "This house feels odd. No one lives around here, and the neighboring apartments are empty. The building seems deserted, and the compound feels cold and uninviting, like it's filled with negative energy." Despite her misgivings, they were desperate for a place to live, so they decided to proceed and rent the house. Ire and her husband were happy to finally have a place of their own. They paid the rent and moved in. As Ola and Ire moved in, the neighbors kept their distance. They glanced at them with pity, but no one said a word. Some even whispered behind closed doors. Ola found this odd, but assumed it was just the strangeness of being the new face in town. Everything seemed fine until a month later. One night, as Ire and her husband were getting ready for bed, they heard a strange creepy sound followed by laughter coming from the kitchen. They were alarmed and rushed to the kitchen, but found no one there. Confused and frightened, they returned to bed, but the experience left them on edge. The next morning, everything seemed normal again. Ola left for work and Ire stayed at home. As she sat in the living room, she began hearing strange noises again. This time, whispers from her bedroom. Scared, she initially wanted to run out of the house, but she summoned the courage to investigate. She entered the bedroom and asked, "Who are you? And what do you want from my family?" But no one answered. The unsettling noises persisted, and Ire became too frightened to stay inside. She waited outside until her husband returned home. When Ola arrived, he found his wife standing outside and asked, "Why are you standing out here?" Ire replied, "I had to run for my life. I keep hearing strange noises inside." She then narrated the event that occurred while he was away. Ola became worried, but they tried to settle in despite the ongoing disturbances. Over the following weeks, the situation worsened. They continued to hear strange sounds at night, including footsteps, laughter, and whisper. But each time they checked, no one was there. The eerie occurrences frightened Ire, and she began urging her husband to find another apartment. "I think it's time we look for another place," she said. "I can't stay here any longer." But Ola replied, "The problem isn't finding another apartment. It's the cost. We can't afford to move right now." now. We just paid 6 months rent in advance for this place and we don't have the money to rent elsewhere. Despite her husband's reasoning, Ire was still deeply unsettled. 2 months later, the disturbances escalated. One day, as Ire entered her room, she saw a strange woman in a red garment standing there. Before her very eyes, the ghostly woman vanished. Ire felt a wave of dizziness and fear washed over her. She fainted, and when her husband returned, he found her unconscious in their bedroom. After Ire regained consciousness, she told her husband, "I'm leaving this house. There are evil spirits here. I can't stay here any longer. Even if I have to sleep on the street, I will leave. I just need to get out." Her husband pleaded with her, "I think I have a solution. Let's invite a spiritual cleric to pray for us. After the prayer, everything will return to normal." He managed to convince her to stay. The next day, they invited a cleric to bless their home. Afterward, they were hopeful the haunting would stop. For 2 days, things seemed to improve and they thought the problem had been resolved. However, one evening, as Ire entered the bedroom to shower, she saw another strange woman, this time dressed in black. Terrified, Ire ran outside, screaming for help. From that day on, every time she saw a strange being, she would wait outside until her husband returned before she re-entered the house. One night, while Ola was away on a work trip, Ire was alone at home. As she entered the kitchen to get something to eat, she saw a young female ghost standing there, staring at her. Determined not to be afraid, Ire asked, "Who are you? And what do you want from my house?" The ghost replied, "This is my house. I live here. Before you moved in, no one can take my place." Ire commanded, "Leave my house now." The ghost only laughed wickedly before disappearing. One morning, Ire discovered she was pregnant and was expecting a baby. She was excited and broke the good news to her husband, who was overexcited. 3 weeks into her pregnancy, Ire began to feel strange. She felt so weak and decided to rest. As she lay down on her bed to take a little rest, she slept off and had a very terrible dream. When she woke up, she realized it was just a dream, but was so scary. She didn't bother much about the dream and went on with her daily duties. The next day, she became so sick that she could hardly move. The sickness resulted in her having a miscarriage and she lost the pregnancy. Ire couldn't stop weeping, but she was consoled by her husband. 2 weeks later, something very bad and unusual happened. On a fateful Monday morning, her husband lost his job. He was sacked and it was their only means of survival. When her husband broke the news to her, Ire became scared and unhappy. She kept asking, "God, why? Why now? What is happening? Oh my God." She cried so much as if she were mourning. She became very unhappy. As time went on, things got really bad for them. It became very difficult for them to even eat a square meal a day, and Ire decided to start looking for a job. She searched for a job, but no company was willing to employ her. She decided to borrow some money from a friend to start a petty trade. She started selling fruits and vegetables in the market, not very far from her house. Everything was going well, and she was able to make some money for herself and her husband. However, after 3 weeks into the business, her husband became critically ill. Ire became devastated. She used the savings and the money she made from her trade to pay for her husband's hospital bills. After her husband was discharged from the hospital, things became really hard for Ire. She had no money or business, and there was no food in the house for her and her husband. Things became so terrible for them. Then they began to wonder what actually went wrong. What happened? Why have things become so bad for us? Ire thought, things were never this hard for us before. Why are things getting so difficult? Eating a full meal has now become a very big problem. I can hardly lay hands on money like before. I used to buy whatever I wanted, but now my husband and I can't even afford a square meal. God, where do I go from here? Ire started growing concerned about the house they lived in. She was sure there was something strange about about the house, so she decided to ask questions about it. When she began asking around, she met an old woman who lived on the same street. After greeting the old woman, Ire explained everything she and her husband has been going through in the house. "Please, I want to ask a question," she asked. "Please, have people who lived in this house before us experienced similar issues?" The old woman responded, "Yes, there have been people who lived there. The man who first lived there died in his sleep and never woke up again. The second tenant left 3 weeks after moving in. It was then that Ire realized her suspicions about the house were true." The woman went on to tell her the secret behind the house. People who live in that house die mysterious deaths. They move into the house rich but live very poor. You and your husband should leave as soon as possible. The house was built on a graveyard. Ire became scared and surprised to hear this. She asked, "Are you saying the place we live in is a graveyard?" "Yes," the woman replied. "It is a graveyard. People who died were buried there. But all of a sudden, the land was sold and the apartment you live in was built on it." Ire hurried back home and narrated the whole event to her husband. Her husband couldn't believe his ears. That night, they couldn't sleep. Ola began planning how they could evacuate the house, but there was no money. He called his family and friends, but no one was willing to extend a helping hand. Everyone had an excuse. They were stuck in the haunted house with no money or hope to rent a new apartment. A few days later, Ola became very sick for the second time. This time, it was even more severe. Ire had a dream where she saw her husband standing while his soul was leaving his body. She woke up crying, confused, and not knowing what to do. There was no money to take him to the hospital, and all the over-the-counter drugs they bought were not working. Ire went back to the same old woman she had met before. "Mama, my husband had been sick for the past few days, and I have used all the money I have to get him drugs. Please, can you lend me some money to take him to the hospital? I love my husband and I don't want him to die." The old woman replied, "I can assure you that drugs are not what your husband needs right now. He needs to leave that house as soon as possible." Ire responded, "But I have nowhere else to take my husband and I don't even have any money. I have nothing." The old woman told her, "Try as much as possible to get him out of that house before it is too late." Ire knew that if they stayed in the house, she might lose her husband. She hurried back home, packed their bags, and they left the house. She decided to stay in an uncompleted building behind the same street. After 2 days of staying there, Ola began to gradually regain his health and eventually became healthy again. Ire was so excited that her husband was recovering. After 2 weeks of staying in the uncompleted building, friends who had refused to help them at first began to reach out. Some offered them money and they decided to rent a new apartment, leaving the haunted house. They started from scratch again. Ire resumed her petty trade at the nearby market where she made a sustainable amount of money and they were able to feed well again. 2 months later, her husband was called back to his job and everything began to improve for them. Thank you so much guys for watching this short but informative and interesting story. As you all know, we can't end this story without talking about the moral lessons. Ire had a strong feeling that something was wrong with the house. Her decision to investigate and act upon her suspicions saved her husband's life. This teaches the importance of trusting your instincts and seeking the truth. The story highlights the dangers of ignoring warnings, both from dreams and from other people. Ire's encounter with the old woman and her dream were crucial in saving her husband's life. It is also good to seek wisdom from the elderly. Ire benefited from the wisdom of the old woman, who shared important information about the house. This story encourages seeking guidance from those with more life experiences. And lastly, but not the least, it is important to pray. Always pray about everything because prayer is the key. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I will see you in another story. Till then, bye for now. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, and also drop a comment.